Happy Lesbian Visibility Week. This special week aims to celebrate lesbians and show solidarity to all LGBTQ+ women and non-binary people in our community. For those of you new to the show, welcome. Outcast Podcast shares the life stories of diverse LGBTQ+ people from all over the world. We start from the point of view of coming out stories, but it goes way beyond that. With every guest, I end up talking about some of the most pressing issues facing communities and individuals of all kinds, and each episode has had a big impact on the way that I think about the LGBTQ+ community, but also about society as a whole. I'm your host, Rosie Pentreath. I'm a writer and digital specialist based in Sydney, by way of London, and I'm so grateful to have you with us. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the show. For our very first episode, we are joined by Tilly Lawless. Tilly is a novelist and queer sex worker based in Sydney. She's passionate about sex worker rights and feminism, and she utilises her online platform, and now her debut novel, to speak honestly and revealingly about her real experiences within the sex industry from a queer perspective. Through writing and public speaking, she works to shine a light on the everyday stigma that sex work has come up against. Her 2017 TED Talk on the importance of sex work to the feminist movement has been viewed nearly 80,000 times. She's also spoken at venues like Sydney Opera House for their Feminist and Ideas Festival and series, including All About Women and Ideas at the House. She studied history at the University of Sydney and got into sex work to supplement her scholarship and cover the costs of living and studying away from home. In 2018, she wrote a spectacular piece in Archer magazine about her queer identity and her experience of being a sex worker, and about how identifying as both things has contributed to her being shut out of both communities on occasion. Confessing herself to be a bit of an outsider then, she wrote, "I'm used to having to build my own spaces, by tooth and nail, stiletto and pen." It sums her up well. Her first novel, Nothing But My Body, was published in August 2021, and she's already written her second book, with a third underway too. Tilly, welcome to Outcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. It's nice to do something with my day.
How has lockdown been? Is it okay?
I mean, it was really awful in the winter. Like, we went into lockdown end of June, and that was obviously awful because it was cold. But lockdown now is prime. Like, I've been swimming in the ocean every day. Like, I mean, obviously it sucks in, like, some ways. Like, I can't work, but, like, I'm on Centrelink, so, like, I'm not too stressed money-wise, and I'm just really glad to be close to the ocean. And, like, you know, we're probably going to open in about 4 or 5 weeks now.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. With this podcast, I want to tell fascinating coming out stories. So I'm going to go to the beginning of yours, if that's okay. How do you identify, first of all?
A queer woman, really. I use she, her pronouns. I'm cis. If I was asked, am I gay or bi, I would say gay. Like, I sometimes refer to myself as gay or lesbian. I mean, I've only ever dated women, but I also, like, in my private life, sleep with trans guys and non-binary people. So, like, I just use the word, you know, the term queer to kind of be, like, a little bit more inclusive of the diversity of the people that I sleep with.
And when did you come out?
When I was 15, so 13 years ago now.
Was it family or?
Oh, no, so I realised I was into girls when I was 14, and I think I told some friends first when I was 14 or 15. I can't remember the exact age, like some close friends. And then I kind of just randomly on a whim came out one day before science class and at the beginning of year 10. I don't know, like some guy was saying something to me, and I remembered responding being like, "Oh, well, I don't really care about that because I'm into girls." And, like, we were all queued up to go into class and the whole line went silent, and he was like, "You're joking, right?" And I was like, "No, I'm bisexual," which was the term I was using at the time because lesbian just felt too confronting to use as a 15-year-old. And so then suddenly I was out. I definitely hadn't prepared for it or thought about it. I feel like I'm a very sort of impatient person though. So, like, it was just obviously something I wanted to say, and I said it. And then, of course, it spread around the school like wildfire because I grew up in a rural area, and it was quite a conservative area as well, and the school I was at was also an Anglican school, so there was no one out in my year or even I think any of the years above me.
Yeah.
So it was like a really big deal. And I remember, though, interestingly, people didn't make as much of a fuss as you might expect. I remember a guy in my year was like to me, "Oh, well, you know, we all knew you were weird anyway, so it makes sense you're weird sexually too."
Yeah, I can relate to there not being that many people out at school, and that's even talking about Western schools in the 2000s, British schools, US schools, Australian schools. And that guy's comment sums up how being LGBTQ plus was associated with being weird, in air quotes.
When I'd been in year 7, some of the guys in my year used to tease me for being a lesbian. Looking back, they just teased me for being a lesbian because I didn't give them the attention that some of the girls gave them. I don't think they actually had cottoned on to the fact that I was gay because, I mean, I didn't even realize I was gay when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back now, I'm like, oh, maybe they did sense something in me. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And how about your family? Was that a separate situation?
Yeah, so my dad, when I told him, was like, he wasn't against it. He was just like, oh, maybe you haven't met nice enough guys yet. Like, he was like, how can you know? He's like, you know, you're living in a small country town. Like, wait till you get out into the big world. Like, I'm sure you'll be more interested in men then. Which is so funny because I feel like the more men you meet, the less interested in them you are. I mean, it's also like so funny because I was like, well, did you know you were into women when you were 15? And he was like, of course. So it's like, well, how come I can't know I'm into women at 15? Yeah, look, he was like accepting of it, just a bit confused. And I don't have a relationship with my mum, so I never actually told her.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure how she would have reacted. And my extended family were a bit less accepting. My extended family is quite Christian, though. They were, I think, confronted with it from that point of view. But I'm also not close to my extended family, so I don't think it really bothered me.
That was around when you were 15 to 16-ish. So fast forward to about 19 or 20, you were at uni and you started working as a sex worker. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I actually started when I just turned 20. And I started because, I'd moved to Sydney to go to uni from the town I was at. And I had an equity scholarship, so I had to keep up a certain mark to keep my scholarship at uni. And I was really struggling just to like cover rent and things like that. And so I needed a job that was going to be kind of financially lucrative but wouldn't cut into my study time. And so obviously I feel like sex work is presented as this thing that is just endless sort of money. It's quite funny. I was sitting in like a gender studies class with like another queer girl next to me, and like we'd bonded over the fact that we were like both queer girls when, you know, at that time there weren't so many people out, you know?
Yeah.
And so we bonded over that, and then I confided her, and one day, like, I was like, oh, I've been thinking of trying sex work because I really need the money, and she was like, me too. So we just Googled an escort agency and then like went in together, did an interview and started together. And like, I've been doing full service sex work for 8 years now. And I mean, part of the reason I think I've been able to do it so long term is because I am not into men. So there's a real delineation between my, you know, sex I have at work and sex I have in my private life. I mean, a lot of people struggled with my job once I was like more public about it. But I think, a lot of people also really struggle to grapple with the fact that I was sleeping with men when I've always dated women, which to me is so funny because to think that you have to be attracted to men that you sleep with when you're paid imagines then that every straight sex worker is also attracted to every client she gets with. There's no necessity for genuine attraction.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, that was going to be my next question. How does being queer intersect or coexist with sex work? It sounds like any kind of interplay between the two is absolutely packaged up in people's preconceptions that need to be smashed.
Definitely. To answer your question, though, there's also another huge interplay between queerness and sex work because there are so many queer sex workers, both historically and in the now. Like for a lot of queer people, you know, before it was legal to be a homosexual man, for example, like before gay male sex was decriminalized, it was really hard for overtly feminine gay men to get work. And so like sex work was an avenue of employment. And that's still the same for like a lot of trans people as well who like suffer from like discrimination in normal industries. So like sex work is still like really, really populated by queer people. And like I can say that out of all the sex workers I've met, 50% of them would be queer, which is like way higher than like the percentage across like the general population. I think it's partly because, as I said, like queer people are drawn into sex work because of economic circumstances and things like that, and like hiring discrimination. I also do wonder if women who enter sex work straight also become more open to other things or become more in tune with their sexuality as they're working, and maybe like realize that they're also into women because maybe they get they start doing threesomes at work or whatever and realize, oh, I actually really like this and I hadn't thought about myself in that way before, because there are just so many gay women in sex work. And like one of my managers has always said that lesbians make the best sex workers because they can last longer than anyone else.
Brilliant, brilliant. How do people tend to react when you say you're queer?
I feel like this has changed a lot in 10 years. So much. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed the same.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when I used to say I was queer in my late teens, people would be like, oh, what? Really? Especially because I'm so feminine. When I was younger, also, people just didn't believe I was queer. Like, I would say I was gay and people would be like, oh, you're just saying it for attention, or like you're a fake lesbian or whatever, all because I was really feminine, you know? These days, because I'm kind of known in Australia, I feel like it's very rare for me to meet someone these days who doesn't already know who I am, and so therefore already know that I'm queer. So I don't get people questioning my sexuality in the way they used to when I was younger. In my work, I do still have people surprised that I'm gay. I mean, I don't tell clients that I'm gay. I say I'm bisexual, because if I said I was gay, that would ruin the illusion of like what they were paying for. So like, I always say I'm bisexual to clients, and they're often really surprised. The rare times I do still experience like overt homophobia, like, you know, like someone being like, that's disgusting, like, how could you do that, like, that's wrong or whatever, is occasionally from clients.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, I suppose, if you're getting a lot of sort of heteronormative male clients, then that's sort of the world they're from.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good point. I wonder if there's a notion, I don't know if I can articulate this well, but I guess the more you have sex with, you know, heteronormative men at work, it's not like you're suddenly going to be converted to how brilliant it all is. They might all think they're so magnificent that how could you possibly be a lesbian after that, you know?
Totally. I had a client the other day that I actually ran into at the park, like this man I used to see, and like he knows my real name. He's even read my book. Like he emailed me a few weeks back to be like, I loved your book. He knows I'm gay. And I ran into him at the park. He was like, what are you listening to? And I said, oh, I'm listening to John Prine. And he was like, oh, I wish I was 20 years younger. And I said, why? And he said, because if I was 20 years younger, I would have turned you by now and introduced you to the best music.
Oh my God.
And I was like, I can't believe you've read my book and are still thinking you can turn me. This is so absurd. Like, how, like, such an ego thing. Like, I also thought the concept of turning had just been let go by this point. And it was also just so funny. I was like, dude, your age is not the problem. Like, even if you were 20 years younger, like, we would not be together. And also, I can find my own good music. Like, I don't need you to introduce me to it.
Oh my God, there's so much just in that packaged up a lot that's patriarchy, basically.
Anyway, I wanted to like put him in his place, but then I was like, he might be a paying client again in future, so I couldn't offend him. I have to be diplomatic all the time.
Yeah. What about colleagues? A lot of them are queer anyway, but do you ever get kind of weird knee-jerk reactions there? Or?
Definitely used to. Once again, not so much anymore. I think when I started, I never had like bad reactions from colleagues. More like slightly homophobic, you know, not like you're gross, but more like, oh, how could you, vaginas are so gross, you know, stuff that I would say is like more women having internalized issues about their own bodies and sort of projecting that rather than finding me gross for being gay, you know. Maybe I'm being too kind. Maybe it was just homophobia.
Yeah, I mean, homophobia, internalized shame as well. There's so much going on there. You know, women that think vaginas are disgusting, like, come on, dude, it's like the center of you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm like, yeah, I see it more as internalized shame, but it could have been a combo of both. But yeah, I definitely did used to get that when I first started working. But I really feel like stuff has changed so much in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with conversations around queerness and stuff. Yeah.
In terms of your relationships, the people you're with, how do they deal with you having sex work as a career? From the outside, you can assume jealousy and things.
Yeah, so most of the people I've dated whilst being a sex worker have been other sex workers. So I haven't actually had that as an issue because they've understood the work, or not necessarily other sex worker, but someone in the industry, so like a brothel manager or something. And I also think because I mainly sleep with clients and I date women, women are less threatened by it because they don't compare themselves to the clients.
So I guess you do predominantly have heterosexual male clients. Do you ever have queer clients?
I've probably seen in 8 years maybe between 50 and 100 women clients, but most of them have been in couples. So often you'll have bi girls who are married to a man, and for their like 40th birthday or like for their 10th wedding anniversary or whatever, they'll book a threesome. That's always really wonderful. And then I've had maybe 10 women who've booked me just one-on-one, which is always really, really special. I love women clients. Like, I wish that it happened more. I mean, I also get very nervous when I get booked by women clients. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm being paid for this. Like, I have to be so good, which is so funny because I never worry about being good with a man. And obviously also, I'm also like nervous around the women because I'm attracted to them. Like, I had such a hot woman book me last year and I had such a crush on her afterwards. It's not kosher to text clients, like, unless they text you. But like, I would like look at my phone and be like, has she messaged me to see me again? But yeah, I wish more women booked me. But there's just like, I mean, there's a few things around like women clients, which is firstly, it's like not as acceptable for women to pay for sex. And also like women have like statistically less of an expendable income than men. So like, you know, men are more able to afford to book sex workers. Yeah. And I once actually got booked by a pregnant woman as well, which was amazing.
What was that like?
Oh, I mean, I'd never slept with a pregnant woman before, so it just blew my mind anyway, regardless of being paid for it. She was 7 months pregnant. She was like 2 years older than me, so like late 20s. She'd never been with a woman before and she wanted to try it before she had a baby. I felt so special to be even allowed into that moment in her life, you know?
It does sound so special, that one. And so wonderful for her to explore her sexuality in that way. Now, going to the slightly less positive, what are the most annoying questions you get asked?
Oh my God. What's the weirdest thing you've done at work? That's always an annoying question because like weirdness is relative anyway. One person's weird is not another person's weird. And I know when people ask that, they like want me to talk about fetishes. The weirdest thing at work is if a guy wants me to do something for free. That to me is weird. About queerness, oh God, I used to get asked when I was younger. I'm sure you got asked this too, like how do lesbians have sex? People always ask.
Yeah, it's like, think about what you're asking us. Apart from the fact it's very private, is also homophobic and misogynistic. Also, how could someone be that disconnected from their body that they couldn't imagine what you do?
Yeah. And I also remember I used to get asked, then you must be a virgin, right? That was always the worst question. I was in a 2-year relationship with a girl from 17 to 19 and I used to get asked that. And it's so insulting because it's like completely discounts or like the validity of your entire relationship.
Outcast. Coming out stories from inspiring LGBTQ plus people today. What qualities has sex work, or being a queer sex worker specifically, given you that you describe being proud of or grateful for?
Definitely being really shrewd and being able to pick up red flags in men's behavior specifically. When any of my straight friends start dating a guy, I can have a suss on the guy very quickly and assess what kind of man he is and often notice things before anyone else does in the way he behaves. I think it's also given me really clear boundaries, especially in like physical interactions of like knowing how to assert myself, but knowing how to assert myself in a way that doesn't escalate the situation. Because sometimes saying no to something can make someone reactive. And so I've learned how to be, tactful and diplomatic, as I was saying earlier with that client.
You try and turn over negative and narrow perceptions of sex work. What are the most positive reactions you've had, or the revelation moments that you remember that kind of encourage you?
In my early 20s, I used to get lots of messages from people from my hometown being like, I was gay all through high school and like I was too scared to come out, but I used to watch you being out and like it eventually gave me the confidence to come out, things like that. And then also messages from people being like, I was a sex worker 10 years ago. I've never told anyone. I'm so ashamed of it. People being like, oh, my mum, growing up, my mum was a sex worker and I never knew how to deal with that. And like reading your writing has helped me come to terms with her work. So like just helping by my openness, having that help people in their own journey and coming to terms with their sexuality or their work or like other people's sexuality or work in their life. Like that to me has shown me that the things I've been doing have had some positive effects or good or whatever.
Absolutely, Tilly. Absolutely.
Obviously striving for like huge legislative changes and stuff that like a lot of activists and things do and like a lot of community organizing groups and stuff do is obviously so fucking incredible and important. I am just grateful to have made changes in people's lives on just like a more personal level,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's really powerful like that. Just one, a post could just have one person's life changed. It's pretty amazing to think, really. This is 2021, and unfortunately, we're still talking about the pandemic a lot. How has the pandemic impacted your work?
Basically, like, I guess any in-person physical labor job, like my work was done last year. Brothels closed in March, and for 3.5 months I did OnlyFans while brothels were closed, which I fucking hated. I do not like online work at all, for numerous reasons. And then this year, brothels are closed again now. This year I've gone on Centrelink instead of getting OnlyFans.
And you got to do a lot of writing, I'm guessing. Let's talk about your book, Nothing But My Body, which was out this year. What can Outcast listeners expect from the novel?
So I wrote it from March to September, but I will say, like, not all of it was written then. It's 50,000 words and about 5,000 words of it, so a tenth of it is like bits of my writing over the last 10 years that I put into the book. So I kind of used part like diary entries on my Instagram as kind of like jumping off points to write parts. I took the structure from Mrs. Dalloway as a train of thought of one woman's day as she was going about doing stuff. But I instead structured it across 8 days, across a year. And it's, a young queer sex worker. So it's partially based on me, but not all of it's true. And each day out of the 8 days is significant for one reason. So like one day she's going through a breakup, another is in the middle of like the bushfire season in Australia, another day is working in a brothel when Sydney first went into lockdown, another day is Mardi Gras in Sydney, and it follows her train of thought through each of those days. And it was meant to kind of show the fluctuations in mental health and the way the pace of your thoughts changes according to your mental health and the world around you. It was really important to me to write a book that dealt with sex work but wasn't just about sex work, because I feel like sex workers, there's always like the sort of like drug addiction sex work memoir. I was more interested in having sex work as a backdrop. So to me it's more about friendship, rejecting romantic love, queer community. And the three main inspirations were all interestingly queer authors. So like, obviously Virginia Woolf. Then one of the other inspirations was John Reshi, who's a Mexican-American gay man who wrote in the 1960s. And he had this incredible book called City of Night, which was about sex work and also queer community in like New York, San Fran, LA. And then the other one was Juna Barnes, who was a 1920s lesbian author in Paris, who wrote a really great book. People usually know her for Nightwood, but I like her for Ladies' Almanac. This is so gay, but she like wrote it for her girlfriend when she was sick in bed to like entertain her, and it satirizes all the lesbians they hung out with. I like to see myself as part of a continued sort of queer literary tradition because that's very much what inspired it.
And have I seen correctly that you've already written potentially a couple more things? What's next in terms of writing?
Yeah, I've written a second book, which I loved writing. I basically wrote what I would have wanted to read as, a lesbian teenager. I've written a kind of like Twilight, but queer and set in Australia and way more sex and drugs. So it's queer young adult fantasy, and it was so much fucking fun to write. And there is a mythological creature in it that's very sexy, but it's not a vampire. She's not a vampire, I should say. She's another kind of creature. It's so much fun writing for teenagers. The first book took me 6 months to write, and this one only took 9 weeks. So yeah, it was really, really fun. And also I set it back when I was a teenager, so like 2009, 2010. So it was also fun to write something that was nostalgic and make references to things that don't exist anymore, like MySpace,
Yeah. Judging from your Instagram, you read a lot. Have you got any book recommendations for our listeners, by queer authors or otherwise?
I'll give queer ones, seeing as that's what this is about. Like, I'd really recommend Alison Bechdel Fun Home. That's a graphic novel, and it's absolutely incredible. I'd also recommend Leslie Feinberg, Stone Butch Blues, which is about their journey as a trans man in the 1950s, as a working class American. It's incredible. What else? I read A Scarlet Pansy recently, which I really loved, which was about early 1900s queer community, about a trans woman in America.
They all sound amazing. I, for one, am definitely adding them to my long list of books that I really want to read. It is a massive list. What gives you hope for the future?
Oh, I think just seeing how much has changed in the last 10 years gives me hope for the future. To see this much change in someone's lifetime, let alone 10 years, is a huge thing. And what else makes me hopeful for the future? I'm just kind of hopeful for the future generally, I think. I don't know. I think I've been through like enough rough periods in my life that like I have faith in the fact that no rough period lasts forever. You might have a bad period again, but then you'll have a good period again, and then you'll have a bad period again, then you'll have a good period again. And you always do come back to some good times, I guess that's kind of what my book that came out this year was about. The fact that, mental health and everything in life isn't like a linear progression. It's something that goes in and out and fluctuates and up and down. It's just like, you got to ride it out, Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think a lot of people listening will appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's so good to have you on. Thank you for listening to Outcast, a podcast with interviews and coming out stories from inspiring LGBTQ+ people. I'm your host, Rosie Pentreath. I hope you can join us again next week.